Welcome to Off Panel. Yo everybody, welcome to Off Panel. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the artist of the Image Comics series Winnebago Graveyard. It's Alison Sampson. Thanks for coming on, Alison.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So while we're going to get into Winnebago Graveyard soon enough, I wanted to start with a couple questions about your background working in architecture, because I find that to be deeply fascinating. My wife is an architect. That world is a world that I'm kind of generally aware of. You worked in architecture. What did you do exactly? Were you a full-out architect, or did you have like a different gig in that world?
No, I was going to say I am an architect. I am an architect.
Yes.
I've just paid up my professional dues for this next year, even. No, I qualified fully. I was fully qualified in about. You do 3 courses: a degree, a diploma, and a professional exam. And I finished my third part, which you also do after you've been working for a bit. You do it on day release in 1996.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that I've got about just over 20 years of full-time architecture under my belt. And also, in addition to that, I was working as a teenager as well, and before I studied. So I did inking and stuff, and I did a whole bunch of things. It's the 80s. It was kind of, in the UK, children in the 80s had to work. It was what I was doing. And anyway, so yeah, I've practiced for 20 years. 20 years qualified, 25 years plus otherwise. And my specialization in architecture is large and complex projects. So, for example, I was at 28, I was the site architect at the Millennium Dome in London. Most of my work is in the UK. Well, I think nearly all of my work is in the UK. There's a little bit in Germany, but I think that's it. And Oh no, I worked on a train station in Korea. I forgot about that. And a palace in Tunisia. I forgot about that as well. I've done probably more work than I can actually remember doing, which is quite a lot now. So my specialization is large and complex projects, but also I also do conservation work, which it's quite an odd an odd combination, but it's a very kind of current one because everybody's reusing buildings now. And so my other speciality is 20th century conservation. So I, for example, write reports and put proposals together and get things done for 20th century housing estates that need refurbishment, and and I can make an expert argument that what needs to be done and that it's right to do it, and that's really amazing. I've sort of moved into that, and that's kind of became entirely life-changing because you're really, really, really at the sharp end. When you're doing that, not at the you're at the sharp end of construction, like you always are. But previous to that, I'd been doing, huge office buildings and higher education buildings and the Millennium Dome and Heathrow Control Tower and all sorts of stuff. And then you do that, and you're like meeting people whose curtains are freezing to their windows because, firstly, their windows are rubbish and their flats are too cold, and the stuff environmentally going wrong with the places where they're living, and they're going, I can either heat this or I can eat, and then they're looking at you going, what are you going to do about it? And then you're thinking, I see what I need to do, and then you have to go back to your office and make an argument for that, and often you're on the back foot. I know it sounds kind of weird, but you may well be on the back foot, even though you're trying to make that argument. So in my work that I have done, I have managed to achieve something for people, and that's kind of pretty amazing. I mean, it's amazing that you can actually do something. You genuinely do something.
Yeah.
So the last thing I did was I wrote the design report for King's Cross train station, design guide. So people going into the station to have shops or run anything actually. How they did that and how they set up their shops, and that was the last thing I did, and which I think is kind of quite recent. Anyway, so that's my work. I mean, I I was leading the projects. But basically, what happened was I finished Oxford Brookes University's new bit, which was, I think, 168 million pounds, and I was the joint lead on it. And like the day I finished the drawings, and I went home for the weekend, and I went in on Monday to kind of, start doing the housekeeping to put things away. And they called me into a room and they sort of get you redundant. And it was incredibly brutal that you go in and, you're on top of your career pretty much. And then it's like, right, you're used, you're done, bye. And that was it. And I went and I kind of just, and they said, you can go now. And I was like, aha, so much for that. And thanks. And so I came home and I started looking for work. And after a while, I got some work and whatever. And I got a bit bored. Then I was, somebody said, why don't you draw a comic? And I was like, oh, yeah, good use of my time. And so I did. And I've told this story a number of times, and it got published, and a page of it found its way onto the internet. And then 15 minutes later, somebody rang me up and asked me to draw their graphic novel. And in that week, my one of these temporary contracts I was doing finished, and I was like, okay, I'll do it. And I did.
So when did you? I'm kind of amazed that somebody just like knows you work in architecture, and then it's just like, why don't you make a comic? That just where was that connection? Like, how was that connection forged? Because it's not as weird as it sounds. It's I'd basically been teaching myself to draw. I discovered comics in about 2009. And after a couple of years of blogging about this, I have a website called Space in Text, which became quite highly followed. I think it had about 2 million viewers when I basically ran it, and then I kind of cut it when it was doing quite well. And but I did this art website where I was finding out about. I was just discovering comics, and it was like my internet filing cabinets where I was sort of taking notes, and I was discovering Bill Sienkiewicz and discovering Alex Toth, and then I would find some art and then I would put it there so I could refer back to it. And I did that for a couple of years, and after a while I was like, why are you doing this? Because I was doing that while I was working. So I would do my architecture job, then I would come home and I would have some dinner, then at about sort of 10 p.m. I would fire my computer up and I would search around the internet for stuff like this. And then so I was doing that while I was working, so I don't know how much sleep I was really getting. And then so I was doing that anyway. And I thought, why are you doing this? And I thought, well, do you want to do this as well? Is that what this is about? Mm-hmm. Are you thinking that it's within reach? Because clearly I was thinking something like that. Because I'd been a professional inker and I know how to do that stuff. Mm-hmm. So thinking, is it you thinking that you're just, because I'd become so ingrained into management where I'd been running my team, and it had been being like a teacher, where you're doing a lot of talking and you're checking work and you're signing it off and you're doing lots of contractual stuff and problem solving and getting things done. And yet I was doing less and less design work, and which, to be honest, was what I was good at to start with. I was sort of one of these people who's good at design and then kind of got drawn into management because I was on big projects. And if you have big projects, you need to teach people how to do it. Because you can't do it all yourself. And then I got good at doing that. And then I'd ended up doing that all the time. And, doing buildings, but actually running teams. So, yeah, anyway, started drawing. I started drawing, and then I was drawing people's children to learn how to draw. Children are quite hard to draw, and also you can give them as gifts. So it means I got lots of models and stuff. And then I drew Rob Davis's daughter Edie, and it was the first one I inked, and I gave it to him as a gift. And it was him who suggested, why don't you draw a comic? So yeah, I was kind of halfway there at that point. It made a lot more sense when you have actually all that context. But I wanted to bring up, this is like not something I at all thought about bringing up, but so my wife, like I said, is an architect, and she works in a firm where all the partners, we're in the position you were in, where they have to do all the management work, but they don't get to do any of the drafting, which is what they really enjoy. That actually kind of makes me wonder, like, I wonder if Jim Lee is sitting in like meetings at DC and it's just like, I really wish I was just drawing right now. Like, do you feel like that's like? I wonder if that's like that in comics too.
Yeah, I suspect so.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I miss aspects of it. Like that's probably why I did Think of a City, because it's kind of I enjoy that stuff. Think of a City is a hobby, but it's also a 250 person publishing scheme.
Yeah, it's like a project management job for you that's kind of
It
harkening
is.
back to your previous job.
Yeah, I think the thing is, if you enjoy something, you kind of end up doing it without knowing, if that makes sense.
No, totally.
You'll kind of invent something for yourself where you're doing it anyway.
Hmm.
And there's other aspects of it that I enjoyed. For example, I just discovered a sign writing course the other day that's in London, and I was like thinking, oh, I could do that because it would help me with my brushwork. Because my brushwork, I personally think I could improve a bit with. Like, it would help me with my brushwork, and I was thinking, no, that would be amazing. I could go out, and I occasionally get commissioned to do artwork which goes onto buildings, and I've been asked to paint it myself, and I've always turned down the opportunity because I don't think my hand is good enough to go and install my artwork on a building. To paint your own artwork at the size of a house is like kind of hardcore. And I thought, I can do that. I can go out and draw on buildings if I do this course. And I was thinking that would be amazing. So, I mean, I'll get out of the house and I'm going to talk to people, and I could, work with people to do the same thing. And I could get on site and I could smell the concrete. The smell of building sites. It's the concrete going off. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's tremendously. It's the smell of new stuff to me. And I could smell the concrete going off, and I was thinking, oh, that would be awesome. And all these sort of the building materials. And I was thinking I could do that. I was thinking, no. You've just signed a contract to do quite a long book.
Mm-hmm.
So just put that aside.
It's funny how you get really nostalgic about this very new smell. It's like a very combination of emotions and time frames and everything like that. But
Yes.
yeah, no, I think I think the interesting thing about architecture too is like, so when you started, like, especially back in your child days of the 80s, you were working traditionally, but like towards the end, were you working using like things like AutoCAD and Revit and things like that?
Oh yeah. No, I was. I mean, the time frame was I started architecture work when I was 16 in 1986, where I went to work for Porter Cabin, and it was by hand. So I was working before I went to university, traditionally while I was at university. And then when I finished in 1994, I was still working traditionally, and I went out into the world to get a job. And lo and behold, I couldn't get a job because the university had not given us any computer tuition at all. And I wrote back to the university and I said, you should have had some computers really, so we could get work.
Right.
And they were quite, what's the word? They rubbished us. I wasn't the only one to do that. They rubbished us. And then lo and behold, the next year they got some. And I went to work for a startup, and then I could use their computer in the evening, and I taught myself how to do it. But so I was using MicroStation from 94, I think. There's MicroStation, which is the one that isn't AutoCAD. Mostly MicroStation, Vectorworks, Minicad, which became Vectorworks, bit of AutoCAD, and actually no Revit. I know about Revit, but I've never used it because I've not been working in architecture in that way. I could have, but there's certain aspects of architecture, there's certain kinds of architecture I'm not that keen on working on, and the stuff I got offered was that.
Yeah.
Hence, I was like, okay, I'll do this comics thing, and if some architecture thing shows up that is what I want to do, then great. But actually, politically, in the UK, it's changed a lot, and a lot of the money's gone out of it. And this fire that there was at the Grenfell Tower in West London, that is the outcome of the political situation that has come, which is partly why I'm not working in architecture, where the money is so extracted from the system that you can't actually do what's necessary anymore.
Yeah.
And that is exquisitely painful if you know what needs to be done. and you're actually having contact with people who live there who know what needs to be done.
Right.
And although I don't know the person who worked on Grenfell, so it would have been somebody like me, and I don't, I feel for them quite a lot actually, because that's the logical outcome.
Yeah. Well, I just have a couple more questions about this world because I find it very fascinating. I did want to ask about like kind of the how architecture impacted your comic art, because I do think there's some odd similarities. Like, you're talking about your brush work, like you had to work with inks and everything like that before. Not to mention the fact that there was kind of like the traditional and digital divide that there is in comics to a certain degree. Do you feel like there are any elements from architecture that directly impact your approach and the way you think about pages with comic art?
Oh, just totally. I mean, almost entirely, actually. Yeah. People say, oh, what are your influences? And I would say my architecture work. It's almost entirely that. Firstly, just what it looks like. It's thin pen and thick pen, and they're just utility pens and Tipp-Ex, and that's exactly what I would use in architecture, where you can crack out a drawing. You can do about 4 drawings a day, about 4 pages a day in architecture, if you draw quickly by hand with those, a thin pen and a thick pen. So they're actually the same materials, just slightly souped up, that I've been using. I mean, there's drawing on the computer, but you do a lot of hand details, because apart from anything else, it's a heck of a lot quicker. Particularly if you need to get things done or explain to people what they should be drawing. You may have to do everything by hand and then get somebody else to draw it up even. And, because that's quicker. But so there's how it's drawn, and then there's how it looks like. Virtually all of my work exists on the page, not in my head. Because I asked different artists, where does your work start? Is it in your head, and something in your head you're trying to transpose to the page, or do you make it on the page, or is it somewhere in between? And people have different answers to this. And mine's entirely on the page. So I'm looking at it and going, what does it look like? What does it look like? What does it look like? What is the right place to draw this thing? And I design it like you would design something that you were looking at, like a bit like the unity of a building. So, for example, what that does, that leads me to a relatively unusual position as regards something like tangents, where in architecture in the world, and you can ask your wife about this, tangents are often used to unify a complicated thing. Line carries through in some way, and that remains the same on the page. And so I have a slightly more relaxed attitude to that kind of thing than some people have. For example, I will use them to my good. For example, you can illustrate action by drawing something in one panel, and then in a panel somewhere else on the page, you can draw something that relates to it, that helps you with this other panel, if that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I presume people do that. But, that kind of comes out of looking at the page. So, and then say, for example, I think it was Gene Hart I was talking to, and I think he did car design, and he said he's like that as well. He's sort of somewhere in between, where it's a bit in my head and a bit on the page. And if you watch him drawing, he's finding the art by moving his pen around. I think everybody has their own way on this.
I think he worked in.
That's another thing. There's all sorts of things. Yeah.
I may be mistaken, but I feel like Gene Ha also worked in advertising at some point, and I could. Yeah. I'm kind of curious if so you're kind of you're talking about how you figure things out like literally on the page. Do you feel like you kind of have like a? I'm gonna totally misuse this word, but I'm gonna use it because it feels right. Do you feel like you have like a structuralist like perspective on page layouts, like in like the way you I don't know. I guess one of the things that I thought was interesting about Winnebago Graveyard is while you do use some traditional like layouts in terms of panels and everything like that, you seem a lot less beholden to the traditional page layouts than most people are. And I'm curious if that kind of goes part and parcel with your background in architecture. If you feel like you don't feel like you have to follow the same structures everybody else does because you just have a different approach to things.
I think in architecture, everything is a prototype.
Right.
Always. And I don't believe in unnecessarily applying rules to something if there's no reason to. I mean, sometimes there's a good reason, and yeah, Howard Chaykin has told me, not to, he's given me some guidance which I have listened to, and maybe I've toned some things down a bit, but I don't believe in what's the word, applying rules just because one should.
Right.
So why do you do that? I mean, particularly since I'm drawing image comics, I think if I was working with maybe the big two, I might think differently, where I might think I should conform a bit to this. But if it's an image comic, I own it. It's my gamble. I can do this. So in architecture, the kind of people I worked with were people like Richard Rogers and Will Alsop. And these are art buildings. These are exceptionally commercial, massive money-making buildings that are derived from art. And that's kind of a fairly narrow field. I mean, for example, I don't know if anyone who's listening to this knows the art school in Toronto. Well, that's an Alsop, for example. That was contemporary with when I was there. So it's kind of really weird stuff. So I know that real art can be genuinely commercial, and I don't believe that we should ever underestimate the public, their capacity to get it and enjoy it. Mm-hmm. I mean, working at the Millennium Dome was like that, where it was all like that, where we were putting these art buildings together with and you'd be talking to the person who was digging the hole about it, because it was that seat of the pants, where you'd go out into the site and you'd be standing talking to the guy digging the hole, going, "This is what we're trying to do." Mm-hmm. And then you just, like people, you just talk about what you were trying to do, and they'd get it, and we were all in it together, and it was kind of exciting like that. It made me realise that your man in the streets really, really, really does enjoy a bit of slightly abstract art, mm-hmm. even. People get it, or not everybody gets it, but I don't think we should, take a view that people don't.
Right. I mean, not to use this as I feel like he's probably an extreme example, but you go to Barcelona and you go to like all the Gaudi stuff, and it's just kind of it's kind of amazing, because it's like that's a reason to go to Barcelona, and he turned buildings into art, or parks into art. I love Park Güell. I thought that was amazing.
Yeah. And why should one not do that?
Right.
I mean, the other thing I believe in, it's sort of an answer to your question, is I'm a great believer in plurality, that there is space for everybody. We should have variety. It's like what cities are like. Why should we all talk the same way, mm-hmm. or look like the same thing?
100% agree. Yeah. I mean, and I do think that, I don't know, like when I was reading Winnebago Graveyard, there's like some pages where it's like, I feel like instead of following the rigid structure, it's like it seems like you kind of are looking for flow of the story in a different way, and like you're kind of placing panels based off of what feels right. Do you feel like when it comes to page layouts, like do you kind of have a feel oriented process when you're deciding on the page, or do you have a more formal structure to it?
Oh no, there isn't really a formal structure. What I'm trying, you're correct that I am trying to do that. And what I try and do with each spread, they're designed as spreads, mm-hmm. actually, as two separate pages, because I try and go on what people are actually looking at. They're looking at the whole spread, not the half page. And so I go on spread, and then I'm like, what are we trying to say here? For example, in Winnebago Graveyard, there's one where Dan and Chrissy are fighting somebody in a cloak, and then there's some kind of conversation that comes out of it, and it's spread, and it was written as 2 pages. And what I do, I think, is I take 3/4 of the spread for the first panel where they're fighting, and I make it look like Chrissy's hanging off the edge of a cliff. Well, that was the idea, was that they're not really very good at fighting. It's kind of, it's like somebody hanging off the edge of a cliff and kicking their legs and not really meeting any resistance. And that was what I was thinking about. I thought, if I can give this idea to the reader, that all the weight is at one side of the page, as it were, at one side of the spread, and the sort of, she's kicking slightly, ineffectually, mm-hmm. then I can communicate what I'm trying to communicate without actually saying it. So I do that on everything, yeah. I don't know whether I'm going to do that on the next book, because I don't know if I'm going to have time to do that. I might have to be a bit more traditional, but kind of that's what I'd like to do. I mean, I think it really helps.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I want to get into your overall process, not just in the page layout standpoint. Specifically through the Prism Winnebago Graveyard, which I should say is your image horror series with Steve Niles that has his collection dropping soon.
It does, yes.
Let's say let's say you're in the situation where you just got a script from Steve. What's your process like going from reading the script to passing it on to Stéphane Petro? I apologize if I horribly mispronounced that. For colors, like what's that process like?
Okay, I get the script. I think I have a process pretty similar to most people's, except that there's a bit of it that might not be. Get the script, read it through, put some highlighters on it, as to who the characters are, what how many times they occur, what the bigger picture, as it were. Then I go through the script and I do really, really small thumbnails, maybe 1.5 inches high, of the spreads. Just kind of, sort of, what's the word, crystallizing the big moves. It's like there's a big panel here and there's a big thing here and these are the people and this is where they could be. And I break it down a bit. And then I've tried going from that into the pencils, but really that's not good for me. So as a newbie in comics, what I do is I do a layout, a kind of bit of a rubbish layout at print size on a bit of layout paper, and I tell you, they are poor. And I've never ever I don't show people those because they're the ugly on the planet, but they are to scale, and they're terrible. And but things are in exactly the right place, and it's those which are the most important bit of work that I do. And then I enlarge that to 150%, and then I pencil the book, and then I scan it in, and I print it out in blue, and then I ink it, and I scan that in, and that's kind of it, really. I don't do. I try and just knock it on the head in the inks. I really, really, really try not to do anything further to it, because I think it's a bit like cycling with a helmet. If you give yourself a space to do it, you might be doing an awful lot more than what you need to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I scan it and send it off. And then what I do is I print it out. So it exists in the inks, and Steph's got it. And then the next bit of the process does depend on who the colorist is. And different colorists have different things, and we have various understandings or whatever. But for Steph, he's a very experienced colorist, and but there is things he needs to know. He's used to working with editors, for example. So I print out the art again at kind of a spread onto a page of A4, and I overmark it with whatever needs to be said, and it's things like time of day, mood, light sources, anywhere where there needs to be sort of emphasis or density, any specific colors. Possibly if I need to clarify what they're doing, but usually it's the mood stuff and the time of day stuff that's the most important. And I think the only question he needed to ask me was, what is party lighting?
What is party lighting?
What is party lighting? Is like disco lights.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, there is actually, when the right at the beginning, when the hand comes out of the stomach of the person, there's party lighting. Yeah, so that was. I think that was the only question he's had to ask. And you send all that off, and then it comes back, and it's pretty much been spot on. I mean, we've had a bit of a conversation about how gradients on the black, which I kind of realised after about the second book that I wasn't drawing them to have that done. And they were better off without the gradients on the black, so I got him to stop doing that, which he did. And I think that was about the only thing in the trade. There are some gradients on the black, but there's a lot less. There's a lot less of them. So that was the only thing. But he's been absolutely amazing. I mean, he's really, really good at doing. I was going to say he's really good for doing what he's asked to do. He's just really doing it. But he doesn't. There's nearly no notes on when it comes back. You send out the notes because he's asked for them. The art comes back and it's like, yeah. And that's kind of great, really. But the other thing is when I got to the fourth book, the last book, basically I was drawing it while I was marketing the other books
Mm-hmm.
as well, and I was I had loads of time, but with that book, it came right to the end where I think I was doing the last page 2 3 days before when I should have been handing the work in, all the work in. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
everything was done, but this last page wasn't. So I kind of took him to the wire a bit, which he was quite good about. And then that was it. And Aditya Bidikar has lettered that book, and he has a process where he likes to hand in the book. So I got all the pages finalised, and then you basically give Aditya the finished pages, and then he drops his lettering onto them, and then he hands it in, and that's kind of it. But the other part was, while I was doing that, I also did all the backmatter as well, which for Winnebago Graveyard, it's really involved backmatter. Because that's what we wanted to do was like these 19. I don't know. I don't know if you got these when you were little, and you get these albums where it was like you'd have a whole a real mixed bag of stuff where you'd like get a horror story, then you'd turn the page and there'd be something about diseases,
Mm-hmm.
then you turn the page and there'd be something about some weird artist, and then you turn the page and there'd be a cartoon or something. And I wanted to have the comic like that,
Mm-hmm.
where people will keep the comic if we do this.
Yeah. Do you read
Works.
Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips stuff at all?
No.
So all their stuff is, well, tends to be fairly noiry, and so
Mm.
they have these essays in the back that are typically contextually related, whether it's talking about a film noir story from like the 1950s, or like a book or whatever, like pulp. When they were doing Incognito, they would like talk about like pulp's influence and everything like that.
Oh yeah, no, sorry, I do know. No, I had that in mind where I thought we can get people to buy our singles if we make them, if we have all the singles exclusive material,
Yeah.
which I don't know if we did. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I'm the kind of people who we wanted to buy the book. We wanted young people to buy the book. I mean, we wanted everybody to buy the book, but we wanted younger people to buy the book because this is a gateway horror book.
Mm-hmm.
This is the kind of book that you might buy if you were 13 and you were like, what's a horror book? Who is
Mm-hmm.
Steve Niles? Is this? Shall I try it? And you think, maybe this is the book because it's kind of quite short and it's a done in one, and it's beginning, middle, and end, and it's not going to confuse you too much. And so that's who we wanted to buy. And we thought, well, they don't have a lot of money, and we want to give, if you're in that position, you want to get as much as you can for your money, and you want it to work. So that was who we were thinking of, really, was how these kind of slightly geeky 14-year-olds who know everything about horror films, well, what can we give them?
Mm-hmm.
What we've got. So hence you get a kind of set of fairly advanced essays from Sarah Horrocks, where I told her not to, don't write it for children,
Right.
because this has got to be proper,
Yeah.
So we're not doing any talking down, and they may not understand it, but maybe in the future they will. And so that was where we were coming from with the essays. And then Casey Gilly has done the Satanism essays, and her partner Jack is a youth librarian. And so it's kind of, I say we want it to go into libraries. We want you to tell people something that they can kind of come back to.
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to say? And so she's written very kind of concisely on on actual real Satanism, but the horror and the ritual and the dogma and where are we now, and that it's all very sort of clear. And so yeah, there's a whole load of other stuff. Some of it's singles. Sarah's stuff is singles exclusive, and we've got a new one in the trade from her, and then we've published all of Casey's in the trade, I think.
I believe.
And we have another one as well. We've got Claire Napier as well has come in.
That's great. Yeah, no, I'm
Yep.
a big backmatter fan, and I feel like it does a very good job of, like you're saying, like convince people to go and read the singles or buy the singles, but also like give it a little more. I mean, like not that you're trying to make it a Consumer Reports like cost benefit analysis type thing, but it does give you a little bit more bang for your buck and like ties the whole thing together a little bit better. And I thought that was really great.
I mean, there is the other thing that is people say, why have you done these essays? And it's like, well, Sarah's are for colour, and cases of context.
Mm-hmm.
Because, of course, whether we whether we know about it or not, Satanism is a religion to some people.
Totally.
And, therefore this needs some kind of context. There is the story and then there is the world. And it's kind of like, what are we doing? And so, as I say, it's films are colour, factual essays are context.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it does help.
Yeah, I think it does too. Actually, I did want to say too, I was at the Image Expo where you announced it, and I seem to recall you bringing up the fact that this was a horror book for young people, and like everybody, and like I remember you describing it, and everyone thinking it was like the most awesome thing. You could just tell that people were very entertained by it. I think you and Howard Chaykin had by far the most entertaining presentations of anybody then. It was great.
I think the thing is about doing image books, it's your book. It's deeply, deeply personal, and it's kind of like, as I was asked to write a letter for Diamond when this trade was coming out, and they asked me, write down where you're coming from, and I was like, well, this is a family affair.
Mm-hmm.
This is my partner, this is my best mate, this is my nephew, this is our friend's son, this is our friend's daughter, this is the guy who lives in the next street. This is all true, and it's kind of like, basically the book's for Alistair. He's 14 now, but he was reading all these horror film book magazines and things, and he knew everything there was to talk about these things, and he's going to school, and this is what he was talking about. And I'm like, where do you start? There is a point where people read their first horror comic. And in my generation, we were all quite young. I mean, we I don't know about yourself, but we had people of my age were reading James Herbert. But probably when they were about 11, I was 11 when I read The Rats, because I have an older brother, and it's younger than you think. And there's good reason for that. It's this sort of testing of boundaries in a safe space and thinking about death, but it being to remove, and all of this, thinking about stepping off into the unknown and being afraid, and how do you feel, and all this kind of thing. And it's very sort of material for teenagers, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still for teenagers. It's doing good in the book market, actually. I think it's more of a book market book than a comic market book, but it's great. I mean, Barnes and Noble have us on their blog this month, so that's kind of cool.
That's great.
So book market seems to be liking it, yeah.
I sometimes think that books like yours, like another book that did well in the book market, like better than comic shops, from what I understand, was Nathan Fairbairn and Matt Smith's Lake of Fire. And I think sometimes it's like, because your book is 4 issues, and because it like comes into a nice book when it's all said and done, it's almost more likely to play as a long tail seller instead of single issues, because of the nature of it. Like, some people are going to wait for trade, but even beyond that, it's going to be a nice tome at the end for the book market, and the subject matter might fit more to the book market in general too. But I don't know. Yeah. That's pure speculation. That's
the plan. It's like, I'm not an architect for no reason. It's all about it's all about leaving a legacy. Honestly, it's kind of, I'd not identified that was something I wanted in architecture, but believe me, why a lot of architects do it, is to leave something behind.
Yeah.
And of course it is. It's about making a mark in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in a very, very small way, admittedly, but it is. Of course you want to have something which is around for a bit. I hope we can keep it in print. I mean, I hope people like it.
Mm-hmm.
The trade's not out yet, but I hope, it's, as somebody said, it's not Harry Potter, and no, I'm not going to buy a boat, but kind of it would be kind of quite nice if youngish teenagers continued to like it, or people, actually, it's a lot of women. It's the actual outcome. My experience, it has been many, many, many women. It's bringing horror is a very manly area. I don't know if you've noticed with the artists. Say you get the Thing art book, and which is the book about the film of The Thing, and I think I counted the number of women in there. There's like 300 people in there, and there's really few women, and it's a very kind of manly area, drawing horror. And I don't think that's really should be the case, or maybe there's a lot of women out there who want to draw horror who have not been asked. And people have come to me since we've done this, and they've said to me, so and so, they want to draw horror as well.
Mm-hmm.
You should have asked them. I'm like thinking, oh damn, I should have asked them. But people like Paulina Ganucheau, who's absolutely got possibly possessed by Junji Ito or somebody, but in her way.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, or Jen Bartel, or apparently, I may have got this wrong, Babstar may correct me, but I understand she wants to draw horror, somebody told me.
Mm-hmm.
And there's loads of people, and Caitlin Rose Boyle, and they're really good. They're really good. And it's kind of, but they don't get asked. And it's like, there is a whole area which is not yet explored of women drawing horror and it not looking like anything else. I think I've got some of the guest artists, but I think I'm right in the periphery of that. I think there's a lot of weirder stuff yet to come. So when, say people talk about doing their next image book and they say, can you recommend any artists? This is what I say, where I say, there is a whole field which is almost unopened of women drawing horror, because and people have said this, women have said this to me, where I've said, we've talked about this, so of course women know horror, which indeed they do. So yeah, it's been women who've been coming up to my convention table very largely, and if you look at the reviewers also,
mm-hmm.
a lot of on what I was going to say, on the good reviews anyway. I'm not going to pretend we're all perfect.
I do. So I want to make one thing I want to say. You brought up The Thing, and I love that movie, but I also recently read the IMDb trivia page. And they said, and maybe this is just like a larger horror issue, but they said in the IMDb trivia page, if I'm remembering correctly, of the entire production, everybody who was involved with that movie, only one person was a woman, which is really interesting. I'm like
that. I don't know why that would be, because that would be a film thing, and I mean, obviously, I don't know about that. That would be about staffing up a film project, which there are women on film projects, but kind of, I don't know. I mean, I just think that think about, I mean, there are amazing female women drawing horror, like particularly in Japan, but there's a bunch of women who are actually drawing comics right now who only get to draw girly stuff,
mm-hmm.
or for maybe good reasons, maybe it's their brand, for example, but can draw other things and maybe want to. And there's a whole load of art that just doesn't exist yet, that is what they want to say. For example, again, I talk about Paulina Ganucheau. When she sent her sketch in for her guest art for our comic, it was considerably more sexy, and I had to ask her to tone it down because we're going, it's a teen book, and I don't want to kind of have a problem with the distribution because we've just made it a bit too sexy in part.
Right.
And but it was like, still, it was good. It was good. It's like she's got a totally unique horror style, which clearly appears to be immensely popular.
Mm-hmm.
And that book doesn't exist yet. I expect she will draw it. She knows she will, but she hasn't done it yet.
I do think that probably my two favorite horror comics of the last decade were both by women. Like Emily Carroll, I love Through the Woods.
God, yes. Of course, yes.
Amazing. And I love Becky Cloonan's mini comics, the By Chance of Providence trilogy. The ones those are just fantastic. And I do one thing I really like.
Those are the kind of gold standard of this.
Yeah, I mean,
really.
Just horror in general, regardless of gender. I do think that I think one thing I really loved about the book was the fact that Katie Skelly is somebody that I could see 100% doing a horror book. I mean, that's kind of her.
Well, my Pretty Vampire.
Yeah, exactly.
He's done one.
But I mean, I guess I wouldn't inherently think of Mingju Helen Chen doing a horror book or anything related to it. And I love her stuff, but it was funny because it kind of almost recategorized her in my mind. It made me realize that I don't know, people shouldn't put people into buckets so easily and say that this is what they do. Because I think of her and I think of Gotham Academy.
No, so did I, surprisingly enough. And I was like, that's the position. It's actually that was the comic. that made me ask her. I mean, I knew her anyway, but kind of, I was like, that's the kind of position we're trying to get, where it's kind of entertaining and it's got a bit of an edge, but it's actually, I mean, yeah. And Becky Cloonan writes Gotham Academy, yeah.
It was co-written with Brendan Fletcher, yeah.
That connects up. Actually, that connects up with what you just said, that there's a Becky Cloonan connection. Although that wasn't what I thought of it, but it's this sort of, it's kind of dark, but it's still entertaining, and that actually categorized all the guest artists, was that we're making an entertainment book, and I brought in a bunch of artists who were really entertainment artists, as Helen Chen's Disney, and she, when we started to work together, and she's like, we had a Skype convo, she's like, what do you want, sort of thing, and I was like, well, what I'm looking, the reason I asked you was because, I've seen your other work, but you can create an entire world. And I mean, I was talking for her to do the variant on our number one, so it was the most important cover. I said, you can create a whole world in what you're doing, because of course she does, that's what she does in her work.
Right.
And you can create an atmosphere, and you can hit a point. And what we're trying to do is identify that it's not all awful, that these are real people, and they're on holiday, and something is going to happen.
Right.
And but I also want you to talk about the holiday, and actually I think all our best covers do that, where it's there is no darkness without, as I say to people, there's no darkness without light. That our third cover also does that, where we talk about the holiday and how nice it is, and then there's like this death.
So I wanted to actually ask about something. This is probably not your favorite subject, but something we've talked about before, and I'm just very curious as to how it's changed as you've worked along. We've talked before about how you're admittedly not a fast artist by any means. Do you feel like now that you're through a few projects, that you figured out efficiencies along the way that have helped you speed up your overall process?
Yes.
That's an easy answer.
I have to.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I'm going to have to do some more as well. The big step for me will be going digital, which I have not done yet, and I don't know whether that will be quicker. What I don't want to think is that it will be quicker. I can see, I know things that there will be. I mean, for example, obviously one doesn't have to scan on pages, and there's all of that, but that's not actually the bit of stuff that takes me the time. The bit that takes me the time is the bit that you see, which is the penciling and inking, and therefore, I'm not entirely sure that, and I would say my penciling is, I probably have the most lines on the page of anybody ever, that my penciling isn't neat. It's just a million lines, and which turn into one line, and then I pick one. But kind of, yeah. The answer is yes, absolutely, loads of things. I think everybody does that, but I haven't. And also, I was going to say, I've just got quicker.
Yeah,
I've just got a bit better at it. And there was something I did on Genesis, which I did used to worry that I'd kind of lost it, but I'm not sure I have. I think I've trained myself that I can do it either really quickly or don't do it, which is just agonizing about positions of things on the pages.
Yeah.
Which sounds really weird. You sort of, you have your way of doing it, but what you don't realize while you're doing that is that other people don't do that. And it's not something, and then you say, how important is that to what I do? Is what I do good because I do that thing that nobody else does, where you're agonizing about positions of things on the page. But I think the thing is I've quite simply got a lot quicker at it. Or I've managed to identify where it doesn't matter.
I've talked to artists who say that, like, you can get bogged down into like a simple thing, like how an arm is bent. And it's like, you just get lost in that little detail. And then next thing you know, you've spent like 2 hours just trying to perfect this one little thing that is kind of like, I'm not saying inconsequential, but it's not like so essential to the story that like anyone's going to notice it besides you. And that, I think,
but going back to what we said before, where you have this, what I would call the sort of the disposition of the whole page thing, where it's like somebody's elbow may be important to make the page look like an explosion or something, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Is that kind of thing, and you're thinking, well, this is all really a bonus. You can just let that one go. for example, might get a very particular idea about how you want the page to look, and it's like you can't get somebody's elbow into the right place to do that. And it's like, well, just draw a tree, something.
I wonder if if and when you do switch to digital, I wonder if like, because you have like the initial kind of thumbnail stage. I wonder if you could skip through the pencils and kind of turn your kind of more lined out area into just inks and just kind of almost skip the penciling process entirely.
Okay. There's something I should say here, which is I can draw in other ways, but they're shit. This is going to sound quite odd, but I'm the only artist you probably talk to who's actually tried to go slower. That is true.
That is the reason, I would say that's probably true. Yeah,
that's true. The reason I started drawing at all, not just comics, but any drawing, was firstly paper. Paper is an entire is a bit of a novelty, but also I got kind of quick and I got a bit sloppy. And this is talking in architecture terms, and I didn't really like that. Where it was kind of like it was getting a bit too quick, and it looked fine, but kind of it's not how that doesn't translate well to figurative drawing, and so the whole point of this was to slow me down and get me to consider what I was drawing, like in much more carefully. So you're actually looking at it.
Yeah, so put like more weight in individual stages. That way you're bringing out your best art.
Well, it's not so much bringing out your best art, but actually thinking about it at all. I mean, when you're doing architecture, you're drawing really fast. I mean, like, you'll get people who will just sit in a meeting and draw a building in front of you, which your wife will probably do. I don't know how old she is, but it's quite likely that will be one of her activities. And people will just sit down and draw a room and draw a kitchen and draw a building and draw a whole thing. And they'll just do it in a minute in front of you. And that's how you do that, by looking at the page, not thinking about stuff. You just look at what you're drawing. And so then you get something out of that. And but what I was trying to do was take what I learned from that, but actually apply it where I was actually caring about it a bit more. And so I've kind of gone around a curve where I've gone from fast to slow to a bit less slow, I think is a way of putting it. And yeah, I can draw cartoons, and I'm not that enamored of them, really.
Right.
They're probably around somewhere. I do occasionally, if I'm a bit tired, they do kind of come back. Like if you look in Winnebago Graveyard, somewhere there'll be stuff like that, where if I'm a bit tired, somebody's face gets a bit simplified or something. Yeah. I know people say, oh, you should do that, but don't believe me, I do. But I kind of try not to.
I do want, I mean, that's one thing that I think is kind of amazing about what you do is two things. One, I mean, you're not like brand new, but you're somewhat new to the act of making comics. And beyond that, you're transitioning out of like, this is getting into a completely different subject, but I have to bring it up. Like you're coming out of an entirely different career that preceded your time in comics, which is a really unique path compared to a lot of artists. People probably ask you this all the time about breaking in and everything like that, but I think people are curious. What advice? I mean, I hate saying the "what's your advice for breaking in" question because it's very trite, but what advice would you pass on to like prospective artists wanting to transition into comics from another field? Because there's a lot of people who, like, for me, I went to school for marketing, and I kind of felt like I had to work in marketing despite the fact I really wanted to write. And so I worked in marketing, and now I'm starting to write, and it's great and everything like that. But some people pursue money-making careers before they get into passion careers. So what's your advice you would have for prospective artists out there?
Oh, I would say use what you've got.
Yeah.
This is a piece of advice I do give. In fact, this is what, if somebody asked me, somebody came up to me and you at Comic-Con and this time an actor, I would like to draw comics. Can I do that? And I was like, absolutely. You've got something on lots of people. So for example, I may have moved fairly fast because I've got some advantages because I've done some of this stuff before, sort of thing. I can arrange a page and I can execute because I've been a professional inker. So there's two things I've got, sort of. But somebody who's been an actor, also has things. They're different things, but yep, they've got them. And I say to people, use whatever it is you've got. You've got something. You know, if you've been in retail, for example. I was talking to Jen Bartel about this when I last saw her at a convention, where it's like, you know, I think that's what she did, and it's like you can tell, you know, she knows what she's doing, and it's come as she said, everything she's doing at that point had come out of everything that she'd done before, and I think that's always the case. So I would say to people coming from somewhere else is to use what you've got, and I don't necessarily mean literally, but there are a lot of architects in comics, as you probably know, and you've talked to a few of them. But there's loads of us. I kind of keep finding out about more the whole time. And I mean, that's a kind of obvious one. And marketing is another one. I mean, if you've done, I think it's, you know, Ram V. Mm-hmm. I think he was saying to me, he did marketing, and boy, can you tell when you talk to him about it. You can. Because he knows what he's doing, and you should talk to him. He's got some stuff, and
I do want to say really quick. I didn't know. I read one of your interviews you did. I had no idea all the people I'm trying to remember who was an architect before. There was like a couple Spanish artists who were architects. Who were they? Yeah.
Well, Emerius is a really obvious one, mm-hmm. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Mikkel Janin, the guy who does Grayson. Him, mm-hmm. Also Andre Araujo. It's all these people whose names I can't pronounce. Andre Araujo, he's Portuguese. Mm-hmm. Gabriel Rodriguez, mm-hmm. He's an architect. Well, he was an architect. He's the Europeans tend to clump together in terms of we're all from a very similar background, and I think Gabriel is from a slightly other background, but also an architect. You get people like Manuel Thiel. There's a guy who's drawn from Marvel at the moment who's also an architect. I forget which one. I don't know him very well. Javier Garon is also an architect. Oh, okay. And who else? There's more. There's more.
That's amazing.
Yeah. They have. When you know it's fairly distinctive, you can tell.
Yeah, I know.
Everybody's using it.
I know advertising comes up a lot too. Like, I mean, mostly on the design side. Believe it or not, you would not be surprised to find out that both Tom Mueller and Jonathan Hickman worked in advertising. Actually, I think Tom Mueller still works in advertising.
Yeah, I don't know what he's doing at the moment. Yeah,
but
I think he is. I do know what he's doing. Yes, he's actually working on the edges of my field. I actually know who he's working for. Yeah,
that's amazing. So I did want to ask about kind of how you've learned as you went along, like. You did Genesis, which was really like the one major project you had under your belt before this. You did was it a Jessica Jones story with Chelsea Kane? Was that in Civil War II? Yeah. Was that?
Yeah, it's Civil War II.
Yeah. So, but Winnebago Graveyard is like your biggest project in a lot of ways. How much did you learn about process, collaboration, and just like straight comics making working with Steve on this book?
Everything.
Yeah.
Well, what's worth saying? Chronologically, there's two big projects I've done, and while I've been doing those, I've done some other smaller projects, but the ones which are kind of mainly work for hire things. But between the two image books, on both of them, I've pretty largely got left on my own to do the book, mm-hmm. and as in they've been script only books, both of them, and. The first one, I didn't realise that. So there was a whole learning experience. And if that makes sense, I kind of kept expecting more. I expected a contract, and I expected somebody to tell me something, and I expected my writer to talk to me and stuff. And eventually, I kind of realised that none of that was going to happen. I just had to, get there.
Right.
Which eventually we did. And I also was only paid in sales on that book, and therefore I had to market it, which I did, which is I think how we've met before, and or when we met first, and that was a really, really useful thing to do, because when you've had to do everything on a book bar write the script, and I'm not sure how the pitching on Genesis worked. I never found out. I only found out that Image were publishing it when I asked Eric in person when I'd finished the book. Mm-hmm. That was how I found out we were doing it.
Surprise!
I was so happy. I went away and cried. Yeah. I was so pleased. And I hadn't known. It'd been years. Wow. And so there was a whole learning experience. We realised that not only do you do the book, but the realization that, in addition to actually doing the book, the gradual realization, it's just you, kind of. And then on Winnebago Graveyard, I went into that and sort of knowing that. And obviously, Steve's enormously experienced. And one of the reasons I wanted to work with Steve was he's been around a long time and he survived. He's still doing it. How do you do that?
Yeah.
Because, not everybody manages that one. And it's like, how do you do that? And that I have also learned. I've not learned it entirely from doing it myself, but kind of I do have eyes. And, that's been good to know. I have learned that as well, or some of it. And then also with Winnebago Graveyard, I've produced this one. I've actually probably done more on than Genesis, where I also booked the lawyer and made the contract and pitched the book and whatever else one does. Drew it, brought in the people.
I was actually going to mention that you thanked Caitlin D'Amata in the back of the book, and I was like, oh, Caitlin D'Amata, comics lawyer.
Yes. Again. yeah. I also thank Harris Miller as well, because I started with him, and I think he's pretty great, to be honest.
That's great.
I don't think I should say that, but he has helped me a lot. I mean, when I was doing Genesis, he was the lawyer on that, and I was like lost. I won't say I was lost, but I was like, I just didn't know how things, like, for example, when the book had gone to Image, I didn't know how it worked because nobody actually tells you what happens. And he said, in a week's time, I mean, we had a conversation. He said, in a week's time, you're going to get proofs and you need to sign them off and that kind of thing. And I was like, I hadn't known, nobody tells you that. How do you know?
Right.
And so I was like, kind of, oh yeah, okay. So I know what's coming. And stuff like that is helpful. And there are a lot of people who've done things like that for me, where they've told me bits and pieces, where a lot of Image stuff particularly is not talked about. And people have told me a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of this and a bit of that. And that's helped enormously.
Yeah.
Which I'm not going to say what it is, because I don't like to admit what I don't know, but kind of, I suppose if you're talking about advice, I would say to anyone else who is in my position, and there must be many, it's like you're doing an Image book, but you kind of don't really know what you're doing. It's like, well, just ask people because they'll tell you. And they do.
I think the thing that a lot of people don't realize going into an Image book is like the act of making the comic is in some ways the least, like, it's like the least intense part of the job, because it's like, if you're an artist, how to draw a comic, but like I said earlier, you were the person who announced the book at Image Expo. You do press, I'm sure you do all kinds of stuff prepping the book for release, or for sending in the files and everything. I mean, like, making an Image comic and making something like Winnebago Graveyard isn't just an act of creating a comic, but it's promoting it, it's producing it, it's doing everything, and it's so much more sprawling.
Yeah, and even now, when the book has gone to print, and I'm probably going to get some comps probably this next week or next week. It's probably printed at this minute. I still have things. I made book plates. I sent them out, and I've signed some book plates today. I've got one more book plate to send out. Somebody who's probably, I know it's only going to be me who signs that. So I've got all the book plates to do. Trades coming out. So, for example, we're having this conversation, and there might be other conversations, and whatever else that goes with the book coming out. I'm not doing a lot of signings because I'm in the UK, and there's not that many venues, particularly as we get close to Christmas. So there's less than you might think. Mm-hmm. So, but I'm doing a signing, and and then you have to sell the book again. Mm-hmm. And I've got a little list of things that I need to do. I need to write to a librarian to review it. And, when you get the actual material book, there's more things to do. Some people only review hard copies. And, I don't know. And then there's foreign language editions.
I was going to bring that up, yeah.
That's something I will handle. And we're likely to have one. And which I can't say about it now, but very likely, because our book started in France, really. Mm-hmm. It didn't start at Image. It started in Europe. It's a very European book, actually. It started in Europe and then it sort of became more American. But it's our colorist Steph was brought to us by Glenat, who suggested him and connected him up. And I'm like, yep, particularly, if something's suggested by a publisher, if you want them to publish your book, you'd probably do it.
Right.
So yeah, that's how he came to the project. It was from a French publisher. And
but really quick, you worked with Jordi Belair on covers, right? Was that the situation?
Yeah. Why did I do that? I just wanted to do the covers. I've been wanting to work with Jordi for a long time. She was actually down to do Genesis, and before she did any Marvel work, and I think she got the Marvel work. I don't know what happened there, but somehow that didn't work out for us. And so I'd been like, I would like to work with Jordi, and she sort of, we'd had all these conversations about Genesis. She sort of does know, she knows what I want, pretty much. And so I was like, this would be great. And then what happened? There was some charity thing. I can't remember what it was, where somebody was fundraising for something. And I was like, could we, if I pay some money, we'll pay some money to this charity if you colour my cover or something. I can't remember what it was. And something. And I was like, yes. Because I wouldn't have said no to her colouring the whole book, but kind of, I'm not sure quite what happened. I can't remember what happened there. I don't know if I asked. I don't think I asked her, to be honest. I think I probably assumed she'd be too busy or something like that.
Which is probably a fair assumption.
Yeah, I don't know. She could have coloured it. I think it would have been not the worst thing in the world if she's doing Redlands almost concurrently, that she could have satisfied herself that the books were sufficiently different. It would be the worst thing in the world to do. And if that makes sense.
No,
and then,
it totally does.
But I wanted her to do it. And what I wanted to do with the covers was just really grab the opportunity that we're doing an image book, and we can do anything we want, pretty much. And it's going to go onto bookshelves. And therefore, I'm literally putting my money where my mouth is. Literally. Therefore, we're going to go out and do a gamble, because my work world has been predicated on good art gambles. So we're going to take a gamble. I'm going to do something that doesn't look like anything else, and hence we're going to do this sort of, I would call it dark Eleanor Davis thing, which is accurate. What I said. Yeah, it's like kind of Eleanor Davis but dark.
Yeah.
And or maybe and that will be fun for me to draw on. I can have a bit of fun, and I can do something with it. And I don't know. Largely with these things, I don't know really what I'm going to do until I do it. And I will see how that works. And I thought with the kind of book that it is, where we're talking about Satanism, I can use this to bring together some of our disparate themes and deal with my landscape and deal with these very sort of different things that we're doing. And we can make a fairly abstract cover. Like the aim of covers is to sell the book. That's the whole point of them. They're, as I think I wrote in my essay for House, they're your John the Baptist. They go out in front of you and tell everybody what it's about and tell them to believe. And so I'm like, okay, we'll do one of my art gambles. I will try something, and I'm kind of glad I did that.
Yeah,
I think you have to do that. I mean, it's not always the thing, but with an image book, it should be.
I mean, goal number one with the cover is to draw people's attention, and I think that they do that very well. A
really, really big black triangle.
Exactly. So the last thing I want to talk about was, I want to bring up Think of a City, your project where, this may be a poor description of it, but I'm going to try my best, where an array of artists from comics and outside of comics have worked to create a vision of what the idea of a city means to them in individual pieces. So that pipeline has slowed down a fair bit, with the last post going up in September and the one before that in March. Is that still an ongoing project, or has that been kind of backburned?
Yes, it is an ongoing project. I put it. The reason I had to put it on hiatus because if you think about it, I couldn't market two things at once.
Yeah.
My social media feeds would become a nightmare for people because they would just be spamming two things, and rather than spamming one thing and talking about something else, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I put it on hiatus because my resources were strained, I think, where I could. With the book I had, because it was only really me marketing it, I had to put all my resources into marketing, my personal resources, my time, and my ability to be on social media spamming things. I had to put them all onto my own book, and because obviously that's me being paid, and so I did. But I've brought Think of a City back, and the reason it's had a delay is not because of me, but because the person who is doing it rightly needed to get some sleep.
Yeah.
It's that's one of the perennial Think of a City problems that we get occasionally, where something happens in somebody's life where they take the project, and say for example Ian McGinty had this, where I think he had a hurricane or something, and something like that, something really terrible happened, like his house was flooded and the power went off and he had a hurricane, and we had a delay because of that. And I don't really like to take the project off people when that's happening, because it doesn't really help.
Right.
It's better to just come back to it when they can. If you take it off them and give it to somebody else, usually won't speed things up.
Right.
In reality, it's better they just, you don't. We don't pay, you see, so I try not to be arsey if possible.
It's a side project, and it's where people can fit it in, and sometimes hurricanes happen, or life happens, or sleep needs to happen.
Yeah, it's the person who's doing it is Mike D, who drew the woods, and he just finished doing the woods, and then he came onto this, and he was like, yeah, I can do this, and then kind of I was like, a bit later, some weeks later, I was like, how are you doing? And he was like, I needed to get some sleep, actually. Which I think he's done. I think he did 40 consecutive issues, so I'm not surprised. So anyway, he's got it. I think I need to chase him up actually, because he's doing it, and then I think it's going to Australia. Oh my goodness, who's doing it? I can't remember. I've got some people lined up for it. I mean, obviously there's a very long list of people lined up for it, but I have two sorts. I have people who are lined up for it that I know are going to do it, and then I have people who are lined up for it who want to do it, but when the week they get it, we will see how they are. And so we have this long list which exists, and then it's supposed to go in that order. But sometimes I know from the internet that people are really busy, or I will juggle the list around slightly to connect some people up. For example, who have I just brought? Oh, I know. I've just brought in a new artist to work with, October Krifasi, and October has been waiting a long, long, long time for an artist, and somebody kind of appeared who was right, who I met at a convention. I was like, you'll be great, and so I've hooked her out of the list that they can just do it because the guy is free, always free very soon. So, but there is a super long list. The way I would put it is, we are building a city together, page by page, in real time, pretty much. And so that's what it is. It's, and somebody else described it as a living art project, which I kind of like, because it is.
Right.
And I think this is one of the main reasons people do it, is that, as I say, although we don't pay, it exists as a communal thing, nearly outside of everything else. We're not doing it for money. We're not doing it for publication. We're not doing it because somebody told us to. We're doing it because we're making a thing.
Mm-hmm. That's cool.
Yeah, and it is. And we are building a city together, and nobody told us to. Which somehow is important.
I like that you have Michael Dialy-Nas doing that, because two reasons. One, I think he's a fantastic artist who is actually really underrated. And two, he actually taught me how to pronounce his name properly in a bar in New York once, and I've never forgotten his name for that reason. I'm just always like,
you notice I didn't pronounce it. I'm absolutely terrible at pronouncing people's names, but I always say to people, it's like, at least it shows people read.
Oh,
At least there is that. Yeah, we've done about 78 people. We've had about 78 contributions, and we've got about another 150 or so on the books.
whoa.
Yeah, we're not close to finishing.
Yeah.
No, it's not a small project, and of those, some of those are two people because obviously we've involved a number of writers, and of those, I think we might have a few unattached. We might have the odd unattached writer. I do pair people up, but also the other thing is that I don't want the project to be insufficiently diverse because this is a city.
Sure.
It's actually got to be. It actually conceptually has to be diverse. It's not just a wish; it's a thing it needs to be. And I have to go out and I have to go and find people because some people are not quite as much on my radar as perhaps they ought to be, and also. Yeah, it's not everybody's jam, I think is a way of putting
Sure.
it. It's an unpaid project. That's not for everybody. So, I have to go out and find people, and sometimes they're kind of quite hard to find.
Yeah. Well, I have to say my two favorite are diverse. I love Chris Visions is one,
Yeah.
and Dilraj Mann's one was also excellent.
Yeah, no, they're both great, and I think both those two are some of they're maybe the two of the hardest hitting ones, I think. The Chris's was done, I think, during the Baltimore riots, I think. And I was like, is this that was completely coincidental how that came round, that it turned out to be him at that time. But we always say to people, if there's something you want to say, we will support whatever you want to say, and we will publish it. And no matter what it is, this is your voice. And therefore, if we want to use it to say something, feel free, because this is you. That's really the criteria for how we recruit people is the unique voice and having something to say.
Yeah.
And Dilraj Mann's likewise. I think what people say about his is that it changed the way people saw him, where it told them he could do sequential work where that's not what they'd seen before, but it made it clear he could do these kind of composites. And now his book's out, of course, so that's kind of cool as well.
That is cool. I love Think of a City. Winnebago Graveyard is also excellent. I'm excited for everybody to read the trade. Allison, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with artist Alison Sampson. You can find her on Twitter at Alice_Samp. That's ALIS_SAMP. On her Tumblr at AlisonSampsonArt.tumblr.com. And her work in the trade of Winnebago Graveyard, which comes out November 22nd. If you're a fan of the show, there's some big news. Off Panel now has a Patreon. If you like the show and want to support it, consider backing it on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. There are fun rewards and insider information you can get if you do. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Henning Allers, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruno Batista, Abraham Reisman, Adrian Diaz, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, Darren Neely, John Hendrick, Steve Anderson, Michael Perlman, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Dan Lee, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Christopher Carter, Nicholas Kesslake, Brian Dickerson, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mayle, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Johan Borander, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Matt Battaglia, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. Don't forget to like the show on Facebook at /sketched. That's SKTCHD. Follow on Twitter at @sketchcomic or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Want more from Off Panel? Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track Outro from their album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.